Hi everybody, welcome to another segment of Sessions. Today we're going to have a really good day. We're heading out to Nova Scotia and we're going to hook up with an old friend, an old photographer friend if you will, Dale Wilson. He's been photographing for as long as I can remember. This guy dates back to the 70s. He's an incredible photographer. He's actually a veteran of photography, old school photographer, knows his stuff. Was a well-known stock and commercial photographer. Dale hails from Nova Scotia, and he started off, of course, like a lot of photographers back in the day, working for newspapers and just photographing anything that he could snap his shutter to just get an image to share and to try to sell, of course, because we have to sell our images in an effort to make a living, in a sense. Dale also has been published many times, too many times for me to even count. He was a contributing editor for many magazines, namely Photo Digest, a Canadian photography magazine. Dale worked on many commercial projects, like Parks Canada, for an example. He was a go-to photographer for Parks Canada, traveled all over the country, North America, in other areas, creating stock. He was a contributor for Masterfile, which was the premier stock agency pretty much in the world at the time. That industry kind of doesn't exist anymore, which I think is too bad, because not everybody could make it as a stock photographer. You had to know what you were doing. You had to be a photographer and paid your dues in a sense. So since then, Dale got into what is known as collodion photography or collodion process. This process dates back to the mid-1850s, probably 1850, early 50s. I can assure you that this is not the type of work or the type of process or the type of photography that you can simply hit YouTube and go listen to a video for 5-10 minutes and know what you're talking about. This takes years of understanding, of studying, of figuring things out, making a lot of mistakes, learning from the mistakes. This is something that you have to do. This is something that needs to be worked on. This is something that needs to be tried and tested. You have to prepare all your chemicals. Everything is a process. Plus, when you go on a shoot on site, you have to bring the darkroom with you. You're processing on site, on plates. It's quite a process. To me, it's very fascinating. It's really interesting, and it reminds me of the old days when I processed in my very first darkroom and I saw my first print. To actually see that first image coming out and being processed on paper was really something special that I will to this day never forget. This is on another level. It's not quite a controlled area like a darkroom. You're on site, you're in the elements, and you have to use your chemicals and move everything on the plate. You'll see some footage of that, and it's something else. So anyway, and today we're going to be photographing our model, so to speak, will be a gentleman by the name of Thomas Harms from Nova Scotia. He is a legend in the automotive world. He's been a race car driver, stock car driver, dating back to the 60s. He's been involved in car racing all his life and also in car building or restoring. It's really amazing what this gentleman has accomplished. He's been inducted in the Automotive Restoration Hall of Fame just recently. Just an interesting guy. We're going to be photographing him with an old camera dating back to the early 1900s. Probably around 1904, 1905, and we'll be using that camera to photograph Thomas with an old truck, a 1957 Chevrolet Apache truck, in front of his garage, and we're going to be photographing him and processing on site. So this should be quite interesting. I hope you join us. Hope you enjoy it, and of course, I got my trusty wheels outside, ready and waiting, and it's a pretty amazing car, and let's go have fun and let's go for a cruise to Nova Scotia. Welcome to another episode of Sessions. Today's a great day. It's a beautiful day. We're going to Nova Scotia and we're going to be cruising around in this thing. This is a 2009 Dodge Challenger RT with a brand new Demon engine. This thing has a lot of horsepower. We're gonna have fun cruising in this. Let's pack up the gear and hit the road.
In 2014, I believe, 2014, I got a phone call from the executive director in Sherbrooke Village, Nova Scotia, asking me if I was interested in coming down to their studio to learn a process. Now, the director and I worked previously with Parks Canada, so we had a relationship. And of course, by this time, I knew what an ambrotyper and a tintyper, the wet plate collodion process was, and this was an opportunity no photographer in their right mind would say no to. So I jumped all over it. Down to Sherbrooke I go, met up with the great ladies down there that were doing it, and discovered a whole bunch of stuff about photography here in Nova Scotia in the modern time period using this old process. For example, Sherbrooke, the studio opened in 1867, which makes it, to the best of my knowledge, the longest continuously running ambrotype studio in North America. I know of no other that's longer. The two ladies that are working down there at that time had collectively made somewhere around 12,000 plates. To the best of my knowledge, there's no one can come even close to that as far as experience goes. So here in this province, we had this wonderful resource with a wealth of experience, but the interesting thing is they had very little knowledge of what was the renaissance that was happening outside, because there was no internet service there. So when I show up and take a workshop from them, they're going, I'm asking questions of what's ISO? What's the ISO of the film? They had no idea. And it was so interesting because I'm sitting in the contemporary terms, and it's interesting because the wet plate collodion process responds best in the ultraviolet light bandwidth. So we're in a totally different spectrum. I'm working 30 years in a daylight spectrum. They're working since 1967 in a UV spectrum, and we're talking two different languages. So it was so refreshing for me to learn from them because they were not corrupted with anything that was going on post-1900. They had no idea, and it was wonderful, refreshing learning opportunity.
Knowledge was out the door at that point.
Yeah.
You're not touching, which is a great thing.
Yeah, to learn the process in such an environment for someone with my experience, I know that's going to sound arrogant, was the most humbling experience I could possibly have ever imagined. All of a sudden, 30-some years of experience and success had to get parked. And it was literally starting right from scratch again. That's why the process appealed to me, because now I'm going back to Shelburne, Nova Scotia, where I learned photography in the darkroom, where it's a very tactile process, where it's not just making a picture, it's the smells, it's the sounds, it's the darkness. It's a sanctuary. A sanctuary is the darkroom for a photographer. The collodion process first started, it was introduced in 1851 by a gentleman out of Britain, by Archer, and it's kind of an interesting process because what we're doing is literally making our emulsion from scratch. We're taking what they would call in the time period gun cotton, which is basically cotton mixed with ether. It's called gun cotton for a reason. It was used as a projectile to blow cannons, and so on and so forth. That's what we're using in this process, except in a much more controlled environment. But what we're doing, instead of making the gun cotton, we're actually purchasing collodion, which is still used in the medical field. And from the collodion, we put a couple of bromides and iodide salts in it, let it sit and permeate. Then we mix silver in another bath, and we take our plate and put it in the silver to now sensitize it. Once that's done, then you can put it in the camera and expose it. bring it back into the darkroom, and you develop it as you normally would, except we're using an iron-based developer, which is ferrous sulfite. And then once it's developed, then we put it in there. We put a water bath on it, the stop rinse, if you will, and then we fix it and put another stop rinse on it. Then we dry it, and then the creme de la creme, we finish it with a shellac or a varnish mixed with lavender oil. So all those rank smells we had all the way through the process, it's just kind of finished off with a nice smell of lavender. And if you have a dark room in your home, that could very well be your saving grace. So this is just trophy aluminum you find in any trophy you'll buy today at any place. It's easier than making tin, so it's much more contemporary. Now this is a collodion, or the emulsion. The objective here is to put it on all four corners without wasting any and without it spilling back on itself. And it takes a little bit of dexterity to get it sorted out. So there we go. We go to corner 1, 2, 3, and it's starting to dry now because you can see it's starting to gum up. And we tip it up and bring it up. Got one little hole there, one little island, as we say. So I walk that back and forth. Now the objective is to take it, just kind of pinch it there. Okay. Sorry, I got in front of your camera angle. We go into the silver. And we're done. Ready?
I'm ready.
You mixed her, buddy. You mixed her. There's your elixir. Don't tell anybody what it is, but you didn't have a drink while we were... Okay, good. What we're going to do now is take the developer, Maurice, and put about 15 mils or just slightly less. There you go. Yep. And just
50?
15.
15.
Yeah, a little bit less than half a cup full.
Okay, yeah, I got it. I'm going to turn it around.
That should be good. There we go. Put your top back on. So what we do now, once the silver goes out of the tank, we put it in the camera, but just before we put it in the camera, we take the silver tank out and move our developing tray in.
Sure.
It's just that there's not a lot of elbow room in there.
Yeah, no, I hear you.
Yeah. So once we have all the chemistry mixed up, the camera we use is, as you well know, Maurice, we can make a photograph with a cardboard box and a hole punched in it. And essentially, if you go back to these view cameras, that's what we're using. Instead of a cardboard box, they're made out of wood. You know, but other than that, they're the exact same. It's light. Photography is light, and it doesn't matter what we're doing. So these cameras made, the one I'm using is made around, it's hard to tell, but it's a Seneca. I think it's made around 1904. The lens it on is from Paris. It's a Hermagie, which is quite certain based on the serial number on it. It's 1886, which is the lens. And the irony, or the amazing thing to me, is that is the sharpest lens I have ever owned. In my career, I've used a lot of high-end Canon, Nikon, Leica. I've used some fabulous lenses. That little Hermagie is the sharpest lens I have ever owned, bar none. Now, there's a reason why. We're going back to 1851. Remember my William Notman negative that I was smitten over? The ISO of the film is about, we can measure it, but it's about 1. ISO 1. So if we bring that up to contemporary mindset, there's no grain. Absolutely no grain at all. That's why these lenses look so sharp. With no grain, you get an image that's crisp. When everything else works, providing the operator is working correct and the chemical is working correct, you will get an image that's as crisp as anything you have ever seen. So other than that, we simply take the plate, load it in a plate holder, put it in the camera, and we have to guess, because we're recording ultraviolet light, we have to guess exposure. We had no light meters in those days. So what is the exposure going to be? Only experience will tell you. And today, if you mix up fresh chemistry, your exposure is going to be quicker than it would be if you let the collodion sit for 3 weeks. So you have to take all these elements into account. What's the weather? All those factors come into play. Generally speaking, we're talking seconds. is where we're speaking. And because of that, there's no shutters. You don't need a shutter. So what do? Reach up, take the hat off your head, put it over the front of the lens, there's your shutter, take it off, count your exposure in seconds, put it back on, and then hope you got it right. If not, do it, repeat, and repeat.
I've never ever put the fix on a plate that it didn't get oohs and ahs when it goes from a negative, as you see now. Watch where the highlights are, they'll go black.
Oh, isn't that freaking cool?
And at 12 seconds it looks slightly overexposed.
Oh my God, so cool.
Okay, so now it's cleared and we double up on the time.